Hi, this is Kristen Tschida, and I just want to welcome you to a devotional study that I'm doing called Discovering Exodus. And I have my Bible laid out here, and I have my journal with some of my notes. And I'm welcoming you into my little office area, my prayer room. And I realize that I am just kind of figuring out this YouTube recording thing, so it will get better after I figure out exactly what I'm doing. Today, as we step in, we're in chapter 2 of the book of Exodus, and I want to remind you as we go through it, what I'm going to do is just pull out a little nugget that is going to either have a prayer point, something that we can focus on in prayer in our time with the Lord, or it might be a reflection question or a reflection thought that you can bring before the Lord in your time with Him. Or it may be a journaling question that I just propose to you to just take with your time with the Father. And I will say it again. I'll probably say it every day. I love the book of Exodus, so we'll have 40 days together through this book. And today we're looking at chapter 2, which is the birth of Moses. And a lot happens in chapter 2. We have the birth of Moses, and then we see him as a grown man. But what I want to just first of all highlight is when Moses was born, this was a real time of crisis for the Hebrew people. And in chapter 1, they're called a nation for the first time, Israel is. And there's so many, if you read chapter 1, the Hebrew people, the Israelites, they were multiplying and they were increasing in number, and there was such fear that the Egyptian Pharaoh had. So he puts a plot together to kill, first of all, hard labor. So there's an oppression for the Hebrew people. And when they do keep multiplying, then what he puts into practice is he tells his people to kill all the babies, the baby boys born to the Hebrew women. So this is the time in history in which Moses has been in, and so there's a lot of, it's a time of crisis. And what I love about the beginning of this chapter is that in verse 2, it tells us about the husband and wife, that she becomes pregnant, this Levite woman, and she gives birth to a son. And when she saw that he was a fine child, he hid him for 3 months. And I would say to anyone that is out there that has had children, every child that you've had, would you not say this child is a fine child? There's something special. There's something unique. There's a destiny on this child's life. So for a mama, we understand even the emotions of what she was probably going through. And there's a point where she just can't hide this little baby anymore. So she creates the second ark that we see in Scripture. The first ark is Noah's ark. And now we're in this ark. It's a little ark for salvation of one child. And she puts it in the reeds along the Nile. And it was close enough along the edge that his sister, Miriam, was able to kind of follow it along to see what would happen to him. And as we know so well, probably all of us have heard this many times, Pharaoh's daughter scoops up the baby out of the basket and sees that he's crying. And Miriam is quick and she's ready, and she's like, I'll go find somebody to nurse him. And again, remember, I'm just going to focus on one thing in each chapter. So there's a variety of ways that every chapter could go. So just kind of hang with me, and I'll just share what the Lord's been saying to me about this in this time that I've been reading it through. So the mommy is brought to Pharaoh's daughter to be the one to nurse Moses. And then once he's nursed, he would go to Pharaoh's daughter to become her son. So something my first point I want to bring up is, here's this little baby, and now for possibly 3-4 years, he's going to be in the home of his parents. So when you think about this, just when you have your children in your home, as she's nursing him, she's understanding that this time that she has with him is not going to last forever. So what do you think that she spoke into this little boy? I am sure that she shared about the history of the Israelites, that she poured in the destiny that she believed that God was speaking over him. And she was calling him and reminding him of who he is, what his identity is, and to get that firmly rooted in that little boy's heart. So the first point that I want us to take today is, if you are a young mom, or if you are an older mom like me, and my kids are older, but when we had little ones at home, I spoke life into them. I believed, I got with the Lord and I said, God, what are you wanting to say about each of my kids? And I would begin to pray it into their lives. I'd begin to speak it into their lives, speaking their identity, speaking their destiny, speaking their purpose, speaking their call, speaking the love of a Father in heaven over their lives. And however, as we all know, and we'll see even in Moses' life, we all are on our own journey. And so what that mommy spoke into his life, he moves into a palace and he's raised as an Egyptian. We know that because when he flees to the land of Midian, he's recognized by his clothing, by the way his language, by the way he speaks, that he is an Egyptian man that's come to the land of Midian. So first point, if you have not gotten with the Lord and asked God, what do you want to say about each of my children? Whether they're little ones underfoot at home, whether they're teenagers, whether they're young adults out on their own, but ask God what he wants to say. And it's never too late. Never too late to begin praying. Never too late to begin calling them into their destiny. Never too late for the plan of God to unfold in their lives, which is going to bring me to the second point. What we see of Moses is that he grows up. We don't really know much about his growing up, but we know that he grows up. And in verse 11, one day after Moses had grown up, and he goes out to where his people, the Hebrew people, were under that hard labor. And he sees an Egyptian beating on one of the slaves, one of the Hebrew people, and so he kills him, hides him in the sand, which I don't really know how much sand there is in the middle of the desert, but does his best to hide him, which really is the Egyptian way, probably the way that Pharaoh would have done it. And the next day he sees two of the Hebrew men fighting, and if you've read through chapter 2, as he begins to break them up, one of them says, who made you ruler and judge over us? You're going to do to us, one of us, what you did yesterday? So fear comes up and he realizes that he's going to be caught, and he flees. And so what we can think about that is that there's a 40-year period of time where Moses has fled, and he has fled into the desert. And I want us to know from this that there's not anything that we do that is wasted with God. Our years in the school of the wilderness, in the school of the desert, God rightly uses. There are lessons that we learn throughout our whole life. We are learning lessons, whatever school God has us in, or by foolish choices that we make, or mistakes that we make, or even in sin. But we don't want the decisions that we have made in the past to affect and cripple us in the future for what God might have with us. So you may be thinking, well, I do feel like I've kind of started late, or I feel like I'm starting with a lack. Moses would have thought that, and we'll get into chapter 3 about kind of when he encounters God, what's kind of stirring in his heart. But he is a man who's just out in the middle of the wilderness, taking care of, tending to his father-in-law's flock. He's developed a life that has been a life that's been on the run. And what happened is, it says in, verse 15, that Moses fled from Pharaoh and he went and settled in the land of Midian. And he settled down in an area that he isn't meant to settle down in. And sometimes we can settle down in an area that we're not meant to settle down in. So, but none of it is wasted. None of it is wasted. If you feel like there's been lack, I'm just behind, God moves us in the trajectory when we say yes to him, we meet with him, and we move forward. So, I'm just looking at my notes of what I wanted to kind of just make sure I talked about. If you feel like you're starting at a deficit, if you feel like that you are just too far behind for God to use you, I want you to, as we're going through this book of Exodus, notice what God did with Moses, a man who for 40 years was like hidden away. He was on the run. He was hiding from his people. He was hiding from his obligation. He was hiding, and God sought him out. God pursued him. So I want you to be encouraged that God knows, he knows where you are. He knows the lessons that you're learning. He knows the lessons that you have learned. I have a little note that in my life, our early life of marriage was a wreck. And if you know anything about my story, and we felt like as a married couple, we were just really behind. We were behind. We had such lack in so many skills of growing as a married couple. And God has used everything. He wastes nothing. So what I want you to think about today, second reflection point, is what are the lessons that you've learned in the school of the wilderness that God has taken you through? As Moses was in the land of Midian, what lands have you been in? And to look back upon your life and just see God's faithfulness, that's where your faith history, like your life and God's life intersect. And if you are just coming out of maybe a time of the desert, begin to dream with God about where he wants to take you. Ask God, what do you have for me? What do you see in my future? And as we press through the book of Exodus, there's nuggets, there's truth, there's gold that we are mining for. So I just encourage you today to get with the Lord. I also have on my website, I have a devotional sheet with just a little more kind of laid out questions, and you can just print those off. So if you go to KristenTschida.com and go to the devotionals page, you can find that there. So I'll see you for chapter 3.